This is TWIS. This Week in Science, episode number 875, recorded on Wednesday, May 11th, 2022. Why is helium rising? I'm Dr. Kiki. Oh, wait, no. I'm Dr. Kiki, and tonight on the show, we will fill your heads with guts, brains, and tattoos. But first, thanks to our amazing Patreon sponsors for their generous support of TWIS. You can become a part of the Patreon community at patreon.com/thisweekinscience.
Disclaimer. Religion. I don't care which one, and it really doesn't matter. The winged donkey rider, the wine-making street magician, the elephant-headed boy, the deadbeat dad navel-gazer, the bearded old man telling mankind to get off his lawn and sending a flood to kill them all, or any of the various ensembles of godly soap opera stars. All the same to me, and as far as I can tell, functionally the same to anyone else as well. Collections of stories, mixed moral messages, conflicting logics, transformed into doctrines of social behavior that, for the most part, bear no relation to the texts from which they are supposedly derived, and none of which should be considered at all relevant to today's world, because they largely manifested to serve medieval theocracies. And yet here we are in the United States, the land of separation of church and state. But not just here, around the world is too. There are very few places where theocratic rule still exists. Afghanistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, unless you're rich, and that last vestige of colonial authority, Vatican City. And very soon, if we're not actively vigilant, several of the less than United States of America. What we are seeing happen today already, in the rewriting of math and history textbooks, the rolling back of personal freedoms, the persecution of our LGBT communities, the elimination of sex education, along with forced pregnancies, regardless of age or consent at conception, is the introduction of theocracy to the modern world. The world was once full of theocracies. Every nation pretty much was one. We gave them up for a reason. They are terrible, yet gaining momentum in the one place that has never been one. And there is no greater threat to theocracy than science. Science that answers big questions, heals the sick, invents technologies that allows near instantaneous information and communication around the world, that lays bare the actual workings of the human body, the cosmos, the very matter of the universe, no matter what the origin story is, from which culture, whose religion, nationality, ethnicity, tribe, or tradition, anthropology can point to a mountain of evidence that proves that the origin story is wrong. As the fact checkers of human history, anthropologists will have to be next. Evolution removed from textbooks, biology itself replaced with creation myths, truth, fact, data, evidence, all contorted to conform to a theocratic narrative. The death of logic, the death of reason, and the death of any applicable knowledge. And the only thing standing in its way is This Week in Science, coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind I can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening, what's happening, what's happening this week in science. What's happening, what's happening, what's happening this week in science.
Good science to you, Kiki and Blair.
And a good science to you too, Justin, Blair, and everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Science. We are back to talk about fish. No,
Science.
food.
Oh,
Yes,
fish.
maybe. I don't know. Science, all the things. We're going to science all the things. Okay, so are you ready? We're going to dive in. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, diving in.
Diving into the pool of science. Yes, I have
you got this
stories
week?
to. I have stories about helium rising.
Sounds right.
Parkinson's probes, and a diet for the aging brain. I've got some
Oh,
stories
I
for
got to
you.
get on that one, whatever that is. It's definitely time.
Yeah, what do you have for us, Justin?
I've got Viva los virus. Oh, doctors injected somebody with a virus on purpose. California dreaming about the future. Ancient DNA of Uruguay about the past. And diagnostic tattoos.
That's been like the future just out of reach for so long. I can't wait to hear that story.
It still is. But
Come on. It's a tattoo.
Well,
It's
okay.
right in touch. Okay. Blair,
Yeah.
what's in the animal corner?
Oh my
Before my
goodness.
hopes get dashed.
I have animal oddities is what I have today, and that's all I'm going to tell you is I'm going to get weird.
Okay. When the animal corner gets weird, you know it's gonna be a fun show.
Yes, weird by animal corner standards, so you
Yeah,
better
that's
buckle
what I'm sort of like now. I'm
Buckle
like
up.
really can't wait for this section because that's
6-point harness, everyone.
Mhm.
All right, as we jump into the show, I want to remind you that if you have not yet subscribed to us, you can find us on pretty much every podcast platform that is out there. Look for us on Apple, on Spotify, on Google, all those places and others. We're also on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitch, on Twitter, and Instagram. We are TWIS Science on Twitch and Instagram. On the live streaming places, we're here Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Pacific time every week. You can join us live or get us asynchronously, but no matter what, you can find our website, twis.org. Are you ready? It's time for the science. Woo. Yeah, let's dive in. Okay, let's start with a high note. I know I keep doing this and I don't actually have helium, which is like, I probably should have had, the little gimmick of a helium balloon to tell this story. Let's talk about this high science, yes. For once, I'm talking about something that's getting high in Oregon, and it has nothing to do with cannabis. Yeah, that joke just plummeted. Needs some helium?
Oh, no.
Well, maybe we should be looking in the atmosphere. Researchers at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, UC San Diego, have been using a brand new technique, unprecedented even according to their press release, to look for helium in the atmosphere and kind of answer a question among atmospheric chemists as to where is helium going in the atmosphere and how much of it is getting into the atmosphere as we release fossil fuels, greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, because helium is the product of radioactive decay, and so it tends to get bottled up in all the same places that our natural gases tend to get bottled up, and it gets released a lot. Anyway, these researchers found that one particular isotope, the 4-helium isotope, is increasing in our atmosphere. Want to guess why it's increasing? Because we're not paying attention to it, and
Mhm.
it's getting released when we burn and extract fossil fuels.
Oh, that old chestnut.
That wonderful chestnut, yes. And researchers have been trying to figure out, okay, how much of it is getting out into the atmosphere because it's inert. It's not really, helium itself is not a big deal, but we do use helium. 3-helium, the isotope, the 3-helium isotope is very, very useful for a lot of cryogenic techniques, keeping magnets cold in superconductors, for fMRI machines, for all sorts of techniques. We use lots of 4-helium, 3-helium, helium that we actually capture for things like helium balloons and all sorts of normal uses. And part of the helium issue is that a lot of the United States supply comes from our nuclear arsenal, and we take the radioactive decay of various things and we have helium that we stockpile and that we use for things that are necessary for our economy and for research and for national security. But in
Wait.
like the
Does
last
that mean
20 years
that
or so, we've had a bunch of shortages. We're like, where'd the helium go? And we're just letting it go, apparently. What were you going to ask?
so does that mean like the helium from the kid's birthday balloons or at the
Yeah.
car dealership or whatever are from our nuclear program?
No, that is most likely from the produced in very particular industrial production during the
Okay.
removal of natural gases and fossil
Different
fuels.
helium.
But you have to
Okay.
create a capture system to be able to make sure that you have it. But things like for helium, for very important national security, radiation detection, and cryogenic uses, yeah, that's different. Anyway, for helium, this isotope, it's produced in the Earth's crust, accumulates where the fossil fuels do. And we could be using it for balloons and stuff. The 3 helium is a little bit different, but uh, this this new technique has determined that we talk about the helium shortage all the time, but we're losing a lot of it. We're just releasing it into the atmosphere. The interesting aspect of this study is that it can be used to give us an idea of how much natural gas, how many greenhouse gases that aren't necessarily being reported are getting released into the
Mm.
atmosphere. So it can be used as a signature of fossil fuel natural gas release, greenhouse gas released into the atmosphere, which could help us more accurately measure what we're doing to the atmosphere with regards to climate change.
Helium, the smoking balloon of climate change.
Yes. Yeah,
Well,
so
we
the
gotta be
3
careful though,
helium,
because
yeah.
of course, if we get too much helium in our atmosphere,
Now let's
we
start
might
talking like
start
this.
to we might start to float away
No.
We
From
won't float
where?
away. So we don't float away, but helium, one of the
No, the
issues
whole
with
planet,
releasing
the
The whole
whole
helium into
planet.
the
planet might
atmosphere
start
is that
to.
it leaves the atmosphere. It's so light, it just wants to go away. It's like, I want to leave now. I'm out of here. And that's the problem. It's hard to hold on to.
Losing
Just
more
like those
mass to space.
darned balloons. All right, Justin, you want to tell me a story?
Yeah, a 56-year-old immunocompromised man with an antibiotic resistant skin infection was
Eee.
injected with a virus by his doctors and has fully recovered from the infection. Antibacterial agents in general have become less effective over the years since their sort of invention and application. Uh, Resulting in antibiotic resistances. This is likely caused by a combination of overprescribing antibiotics by doctors and by patients not using the full course of the antibiotics, which then can lead to resistant strains of infection. So, for the already immunocompromised who don't have good natural defenses, they're much greater risk of death than the general public. In this case, the immunocompromised man, was treated with several of the newer antimicrobial medications. None of them worked. It was a pretty awful skin infection, creating lesions and all sorts of other side effects. So, what to do? Science to the rescue. Researchers from the Science Education Alliance Phage Hunters Advancing Genomics and Evolutionary Science Project, aka CPhages, which is actually it's interesting. It's actually an undergraduate learning lab at the University of Pittsburgh, where they take people who maybe are heading towards science or maybe aren't even, and teach them how to do wet lab and research. And there's bioinformatics and probably sequencing and all sorts of laboratory skills that they learn over, I think it's a 2-year program. The lab has thousands of phages that they have tested for bacterial interactions. And after receiving a skin sample of the patient, testing it, They thought they might have the right phage to treat the immunocompromised patient. That is, a virus in their lab killed the bacteria in their lab. So a virus research lab that does research on viruses to save lives. In case anybody's afraid of virus labs these days, make sure keep this one in mind. In their paper published in the journal Nature Communications, the group described how they found the right bacteriophage. They cultivated a larger amount of that one virus that was working. Typically, bacteriophages are a cocktail of many viruses that they use to address a problem. Which I don't know. Part of me wonders if that's just because there's correlative data of viruses or bacteriophages working on sets of bacteria. Sounds like their lab had it down to this is the virus that you need. We're just going to build this one up. They cultivated it. They sent it to the medical team. The team injected the bacteriophage into the patient, and he died immediately. But the infection cleared up shortly afterwards. No. He's fine. He's fully recovered.
Let's see. Wait, what? What are you reporting on here? No.
That was just a more dramatic. That was a more dramatic. I'm a terrible person. Anyhow, patient.
So he was fine, and everything was cleared up.
Infection cleared up, and from just one virus, which is also an unusual application of the bacteriophage. It's usually cocktail group of viruses that are being applied. Just they had identified one that was going to be effective. They applied just the one. It worked. A whole lot of science behind it. And there's a bunch of things I love about that story. I love the viruses doing good work is always a great story. But also the fact that this is all the heavy lifting is really being done by a learning lab at the University of Pittsburgh. I find that fascinating. That you can, this is, and it's having real world applications and saving lives.
Yeah, I was going to say unexpectedly applicable. That's really cool.
Although I don't know if it's completely unexpectedly, because this is also, there's other researchers, the tenured professors and the rest who were part of this and guiding the research of it in this direction of searching for phages. So it is meant to be applicable, but to find it, narrow it down to one virus too. That and there's less of a chance, if we've talked about this in the past, for a virus to change or for there to be a resistance to a virus that is killing off infection than there is from a typical antibiotic. So these are also potentially much more sustainable antibiotics than the things that we've been using thus far.
We think.
And well, I mean, individuals,
if it works for now, but predator-prey interactions and these things have been evolving
it's going to be less predator-prey.
So.
Apparently, the conflict here is going to be the immune system of the patient may not be able to have the same virus work twice, right? Because their body might fight off the virus next time around, and that's then that arms race where that starts to take place. But we've talked before. It's something like 2050. Most of our antibiotics that we're using currently aren't going to be functionally useful anymore. And when that day happens, people forget. People used to just die from
infections all the time.
This is a major source of death for life, for humans on the planet. And we haven't really had to deal with it for the last 50, 70 something years. So.
And hopefully bacteriophages will lead us in the direction of not having to deal with it in the future as well. I don't want to go backwards.
Viruses for better health.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Blair, tell me, do you have some data?
Yes, I have some better health through poop. So let me ask you, how do you know for sure if a football player had a concussion? Better yet, how do you know for sure if a football player is healed enough to return to play after a concussion? That's right, you guessed it. Look at his poop. This is a study looking at blood, stool, and saliva samples from 33 Rice University football players. They were able to examine the diagnostic potential of the gut's microbiome when looking at signs of concussion. Their findings demonstrate that a simple objective diagnostic test could be developed to track the impact of concussions and signal when it's safe to return to action. That is a big problem, actually, diagnosing concussions, because the most commonly used test for diagnoses of concussions relies on self-reported symptoms like blurry vision, dizziness, nausea, headaches. This can be vague. Also, players often will not report them
Yeah, a
because
lot
they
of
want to
underreporting.
stay in the game.
Yeah.
That's right. So it can make them notoriously difficult to diagnose. Also, it can make it very hard to figure out when it is safe for players to return to the game. Over the course of that season, they found post-concussion drop-off of 2 bacterial species normally found in stool samples of healthy individuals. They also found a correlation between traumatic brain injury linked proteins in the blood and 1 brain injury linked bacterial species in stool. So the reason likely that this works is that the central nervous system is linked to the enteric nervous system, which occurs in the intestines, and head trauma leads to changes in gut microbiota. So this is something mainly because injuries cause inflammation causes inflammation, and so that creates a bunch of conditions in the body, including sending proteins and molecules through the blood that breach the intestinal barrier and cause changes in the gut. So there is a mechanism here at play, just hasn't really been looked at as a means of diagnosing concussion. And so they were able to find in this small sample size, it was actually only 4 of the players who were studied were diagnosed with concussions effectively. So this is an extremely small sample size, but they found that until the gut microbiome returned to normal, there was not full brain recovery. So if you really do in this case, if you really do monitor the gut microbiome, then you can really see when the brain is fully healed and the person is back to normal. So they want to obviously, so they want to be able to expand this to a larger sample size. And more importantly, they want to conduct a similar study on women's soccer athletes, because in women's soccer, there is also frequent head trauma, and women and men don't have the same immunities or gut microbiomes. So this is something where it's very important to look at how this would impact the female system, because it could be very different, and you need to have that better kind of larger, robust data set covering all the variables, right? But I love this idea, but again, it goes back to everybody's got to have a microbiome baseline. You have to get one filed with your doctor. Like, that's where all these studies start, is how does a normal microbiome look in your body?
Right. What does it look like normally? How did it change in response to this particular insult or that? I think that with women, so with men, their hormones change much more rapidly over the course of a day, and they don't have the same 28-day cycle that the women's menstrual cycle has. And there has been evidence that those big hormone shifts have big influences on the way that medication affects women, on the way that concussions affect women. So, how do the hormones affect the microbiome? And then how does that affect the health of the brain, the recovery of the brain, inflammation, and all that kind of stuff? Those are other really big questions that still need to be answered with respect to this.
Yeah.
Cannot be a single sex study.
No, but it's a nice start.
But it's a great start.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Such a wonderful, just straightforward experiment too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's starting to dig also into that thing that we keep noticing, which is the gut microbiome changes when we have an illness, or when we're having mental stress, this sort of thing. But is it the gut microbe that's causing the stress? Is it causing the mental, that connection between gut and brain? Cognitive stuff is definitely there. And here's one that just affects the brain first.
Yes, guaranteed.
And then it's kind of an interesting, nice isolate. You have brain damage, That's basically what a concussion is. It's
Mm-hmm.
your
Mhm.
squishy brain bumping into the hard
Yeah.
skull.
Playing
And-
pinball on your
and
skull.
and
For sure.
knocking
Yeah.
all
it onto a
those
wall.
synapses and dendrites just getting stretched apart and smushed
It's
and
not good.
stretched. Oh yeah, not so good for the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. How about just never return to football? How about that? Anyway.
All right. Well, speaking of the brain and the way that the brain ages, we know that in Parkinson's disease, there is a loss of dopamine producing neurons. And through the years, we've seen, people, there's L-Dopa is dopamine replacement to try and keep those dopamine levels up. It's a drug that people can take. We've also seen stem cell transplants where they've tried to put dopamine producing neurons back into the brain in the substantia nigra, the area of the brain that loses these particular neurons. And there have been a lot of issues with that. And we know that there's inconsistency in a lot of the ways that Parkinson's plays out and how the therapies actually work. Researchers just published their study looking at the brains of deceased individuals. They had some without Parkinson's disease, some with Parkinson's disease. They compared the brains, looked at single neurons. They were looking at specific neurons in the brains, the specific area of the brain that produces the dopamine, the substantia nigra, and comparing neuronal subtypes. So they're all dopamine producing neurons, but then they're like, oh, wait, this one doesn't look like that one. This one doesn't look like that. What? And they discovered 10 different subpopulations of dopamine producing neurons. Only one of them is the kind that dies during Parkinson's disease. And so now this means this could lead to some very specific targeting of drugs. What exactly is going on in this subpopulation of neurons? How are these neurons different from the other 10 subtypes? Why did they die when the other ones don't? What kind of what mechanisms are happening in the brain? What specifically is leading to this neurodegenerative disorder? And so they know now that not all of the neurons that produce the dopamine in that particular area of the brain are the same. They all produce dopamine, but there's 10 different kinds. Like that to me, it's
And
wild.
one seems crucial to this the etiology of this disease. So I love that. That's a mechanism. We have
It's getting
correlations for
close.
disease. Now we have
Yeah.
mechanism taking place that we're discovering, which that means that it's much closer. That's a leap.
It's a huge leap.
Towards a cure.
And to me, it also explains maybe why the stem cell treatments haven't been as successful as we hoped they would be.
Yeah.
Because we've been dumping a whole bunch of, here are dopamine cells.
Yeah.
But there's a bunch
wrong
of
targets.
the wrong kinds. Maybe they're not reproducing the kind that have been dying out. Like there's so much there that rabbit hole is going to go very deep. And I think this to me is one of the big promising studies on the Parkinson's front in recent history. Very cool study. Yes. 1 in 10. 1 in 10. But tell me about planning for the future, Justin.
Planning for the future. That thing that I forgot to do ever. But California, on the other hand, state of California is taking action on climate change. Starting in 2026, new homes will need to be powered by all electric furnaces, stoves, and other appliances, removing natural gas, as an option. The California Air Resources Board, aka CARB, plans to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. That's where as much carbon is being removed from the air as is still being emitted. The board also recommends the state cut the use of oil and gas by 91% and use technology to capture and store carbon emissions from the remaining sources of emissions. State is already on track to require all new passenger cars sold to be zero emission by 2035. They also have a little bit further out goal for commercial trucks, commercial vehicles, that sort of thing. I think that's also 2045. The Western States Petroleum Association states that the plan would mean more bans, mandates, and expensive regulations, forcing people to pick certain jobs, certain cars, certain homes, and certain times to use energy is way out of touch with how ordinary people live. The Western States Petroleum Association President Catherine Race Boyd said in a statement, proving that even a petroleum lobby understands the value of choice. Meanwhile, in Nebraska, a cowboy hat wearing candidate for governor announced that he would eliminate sex education from schools if elected. He barely lost his primary bid, so thankfully he's out. He lost to a guy who's also against sex education and wants to put prayer back in K through 12 schools, stating we should be teaching the next generation to love God, because different states have different priorities.
Different states have different priorities, but all states are supposed to abide by the federal separation of church and state. And yes, anyway, that's not a scientific topic, but
for now, that's a
luckily
thing.
California,
precedent
as an
now,
enormous
but-
economy, actually has some impact on the rest of the country and the world. So this is actually really good news as I see it. That does not mean the other things that you mentioned are not terrible news, because they are. But this is good news for climate change, because a lot of things that California does develop a standard for other places. So I hope that this goes through at a fraction of what is planned. Honestly, would be great. I'll take it.
Yeah, there's I think 13 other states that are basically on board to whatever California has decided they're going to do with their air environmental regulation. We're just going to copy it. It's just simpler. We don't have to hire anybody to be on top of that. Just and then big industries like the auto industry, the appliance industry, all of these things, they look to California because it is the largest size market in the United States. They look to what they're, because it's just at some point it's easier to make everything the same than it is to make
have
something
special
to a California
uses.
standard, a Nevada standard, a Nebraska standard. It becomes ridiculous.
And as we know, politics goes, this is a roadmap and it's not the final word. And so we know now people are unhappy on all parts of the environmental, economic, various aspects of the spectrum. They're all going to argue and argue and argue and debate and debate, debate. And this wonderfully worked out roadmap will be watered down and will be much less powerful than it currently seems. But there's definitely, we are in, I don't know, from the scientific side of things, scientists are going, we need to be doing things as fast as we possibly can. And yet we have this this negative inertia from our economy that is like, but people aren't doing that and people don't have that. And so the same, I don't know, this is a policy-based idea, science evidence policy suggestion, but the same way that we threw all the money behind getting COVID vaccines, we need to throw all the money behind subsidies for sustainable energy, for electric vehicles, for update. We've already put the money into the Build Back Better plan, which is going to lead to a lot of updating of our electrical grid, which is going to be great. There's a whole bunch that needs to change.
Right.
And
what you're pointing to is the California legislature, which is heavily Democratic, and
it's still going to be debated before it gets
No. I don't think the debates have. I think the debates are just that's the spin on the decision is the debates at this point in politics. The heavily Democratic legislatures of the state of California have a pernicious history of suddenly abandoning the values that they have stated over and over on the political campaigns, and then making a decision in favor of
Compromise.
a lobby that has given them contributed tremendous amounts of money. You see this
Mhm.
in when we had the legislation on allowing communities to vote on whether or not they wanted rent control. Nothing seemed to be standing in its way except a giant pile of money. But the legislatures who had always talked about housing crisis, voted against it. They
Ooh.
voted down rent controls. And there's a lot of you don't think about California as an oil state, but it is an oil producing state, and it produces a
Yeah.
lot of natural gas, has thousands and thousands of natural
Yes.
gas drilling that takes place in that state. And those lobbies have a big impact on the legislature's campaign war
Oh,
chest.
but
So you're
solar
right.
solar is growing. Solar is getting bigger. It's gonna
It
get there.
is.
But, the key is diversity, right? Diversify, diversify, it's like your stocks and your bonds. Diversify your portfolio.
Don't
Diversify
put
your
all your
energy
money into
sources.
umbrellas. I learned
Diversify
that the
your
hard way.
ecosystem. Oh, wait, what? Yes, there's a new study about
Oh.
fungus species this week. Researchers have just published their study in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution, looking at funguses. Funguses that break things down. A lot of them are below ground. Ecologists, we know it's like a tree falls in the forest, and then the fungi come in and they break it down, and it's part of the cycle. And we all know that's part of the cycle of life. But what is the real influence of these many species of decomposers and also pathogenic fungi who are involved in the ecosystems as well? They looked at a number of ecosystems from the poles to the equator and tried from grasslands to forests to deserts and tried to find a pattern of how the fungi were involved in the ecosystems and how the ecosystems work. What they have discovered is that across all of the ecosystems, the decomposers, the more diverse you have a variety of decomposers in your population, also root fungi, it helps to keep your ecosystem resilient. So vegetation might not die out during periods of drought with a more diverse fungal ecosystem involved in the ecosystem. The opposite side, you can guess pathogenic bacteria, if they're really diverse, you probably have a problem. All the pathogenic bacteria, they get in there and they like to uh, cause problems more than fix problems. But generally, having a wide variety of decomposers, not pathogens, but decomposers, is better for any environment. Any and every environment that they looked at. And the researchers say, it's fascinating despite all the other variables changing from site to site, these patterns still stand out. So there could be other microbes involved and other things happening, but the main message here from this study is that we can't underestimate the diversity of soil fungi because it is contributing to the resilience of ecosystems around the world.
Yeah, and that sounds like also something that's going to be very important as we replant forests that burn down. And we need to start replanting them, maybe not in the same area due to climate change. As temperatures change, as environments change, and we start trying to figure out how to manage that landscape, one of the things we're going to have to do is focus on that soil. What are all the fungi and bacteria from where we used to plant this forest? Because if you're going to replant it
Yep.
somewhere else, you need all of
You
the
need all of it.
workers.
The soil is important. Below ground is as, if not more important than above ground.
Hey, if nothing else, this is all going to be a great lesson in terraforming. So if we
For
ever
sure.
do,
The
if we ever do
fabulous
have it,
fungi for the moon, for Mars.
yeah. This is just we destroyed the planet on purpose. This is an exercise. We're just back engineering, terraforming a barren planet into a livable one by
Exactly.
ruining our own. That's all we're doing. Big experiment.
I don't like experiments. This is stressing me out.
Oh, yeah? What if
Yeah.
I screamed at you for 3 weeks? Would that stress you out?
Yes, a lot.
Well, it turns out it stresses out rats also, to the point that it impacts their fertility.
Wow. What?
No,
Okay,
but
tell me
no.
more about this.
Yeah. Female rats exposed to scream sounds may have diminished ovarian reserve and reduced fertility. Ovarian reserve is the reproductive potential left within a woman's ovaries based on the number and quality of eggs.
So it's like we're dropping the eggs, we're killing the eggs. We're done.
The eggs have gone bad.
The eggs are bad. There's no more eggs in the carton.
The eggs have gone rotten from the screaming.
Oh
Can
my
I pause it for a second?
Yes.
Is there like research assistants who are coming in and screaming at the rats? Or is it
not rat screams?
No, I had to look it up. I didn't have access to the paper because I don't have access to a lot of back end. I had to do a bunch of Googling, figure it out. It was human screams. It was someone in the lab. A human came in and screamed at rats. And
for cities, if you want to get rid of your rat problem, tell people to scream more.
Right. But of course, so I was looking into it. It's actually pretty interesting. Like, you can't deny them food or do other sort of stress activities.
I was really kind of
because that could impact their biology in other ways. If you deprive them of things, or if you like turn up the heat or turn the heat down or bombard them with electricity. These are all things that could impact their fertility directly, right? So you had to find a way that you weren't directly impacting them physically, just stressing them out. That was, in this case, screaming at them. And that was enough to have the diminished ovarian reserve, the loss of normal reproductive potential in the ovaries due to a lower count or quality of remaining eggs. They also had decreased fertility, decreased estrogen and anti-Müllerian hormone levels. Estrogen is a group of hormones that play an important role in growth and reproductive development, as I'm sure most of us are aware. Anti-Müllerian hormone is a hormone made by the ovaries, which helps form reproductive organs. The scream sounds lowered the number and quality of the women's eggs and these hormones. So the reason this isn't fully in the animal corner is that this is actually specifically to explore the rat model in terms of human fertility due to stress. That is the point of this study. This is like the starting point to look at the impact of stress on human fertility, because when you go and you get fertility testing, if you are having trouble conceiving, there's lots of unexplained infertility in humans. We're terrible at getting pregnant as a species. There's all sorts of reasons for that, but there's all sorts of non-reasons for that. Sometimes couples just can't get pregnant. Everything looks good, but it's not working. And stress could be part of the problem. So there you go. Don't stress yourself out.
It's all the
I still want to
screaming.
see. I still want to be there for that onboarding session of the lab assistant.
Yeah.
So,
all
yeah,
right. Let me hear your
what are you
scream.
gonna do?
No, that's not good enough.
Nah, I'm sorry.
That is not stressful.
But I've been working in a wet lab. I worked in a genomics lab. I worked in a fermentation lab. Yeah, no.
I need you to pretend
I'm sorry,
you're
you're just
being
not
chased by
loud
a-
enough.
By a clown with a machete. Can you do that?
Did they talk about like using the Wilhelm scream? You know, like did they talk?
I feel like that's not scary enough. That's not stressful enough. It's just like Star Wars. Is Star Wars playing somewhere?
Oh, rats! This is just.
Have you ever seen a compilation of that scream over and over again and from different movies? I think it's great.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Indiana Jones, it's everywhere. Every movie.
This science news is definitely something to scream about, or maybe, whisper quietly into the ears of your friends so that you don't deplete their ovarian reserve. Ovarian Reserve. It's either the name of a punk band or a 2021 Zinfandel. Thank you for joining us for another episode of This Week in Science. We do hope that you are enjoying the show. If you're enjoying it, tell a friend today. Whisper it. Don't scream it from the mountaintops. Don't scream it like in a horror movie. Whisper to your friends. TWIS is a really great podcast. Subscribe. All right, let's come back and talk a little bit about some COVID news.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. It's still going on, everybody. It's not done yet.
What?
What is
Said the
even
woman who took 2 COVID tests this week? What?
Oogly booglies. Okay, yes, people are taking COVID tests. Not as many people are taking COVID tests yet. COVID cases are rising, and we seem to have a whole bunch of new COVID variants of concern. The big ones that we are now looking at out of South Africa are BA4 and BA5, which seem to have some amazing mutations that allow it to even escape the immunity from earlier Omicron variants. So, say you were infected by BA1, BA2 Omicron, it might not really matter to BA4 and BA5. There are now some 30 new mutations in the Omicron variants. They're just going and they're finding new ways around all of the immunity and whether it's natural or vaccine uh, vaccine caused induced immunity. These cases are rising, but at the same time, we do not have evidence that severity is rising at this point in time. And it does seem that even the BA4 and the BA5 are very similar to the severity of the earlier Omicron variants. So, people who work in public health are concerned because we don't know what this necessarily means for future vaccines. We don't know what this means for the future of how this is going to work out for the health of everyone. Interesting side point, a study out this week talking about the 1918 flu discovered that the H1N1 seasonal flu that makes the rounds all the time is related to that 1918 pandemic variant. So, H1N1, we get vaccinated for it. We know that the flu's a deal. We get ready for it every year. And it may be the kind of thing that with SARS-CoV-2, and I don't know, as some epidemiologists and immunologists are calling it, that maybe this is SARS and we should be calling this like SARS-3 because it's so completely different at this point in time. Yeah. Even without vaccines, we do have antibodies that are starting to work for us. In other interesting news related to vaccines, FDA has really put strict guidelines on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So right now in the US, it's Moderna and Pfizer. Although there is a lot of really good work going on currently at nasal spray vaccines, which could be amazing. Blair, you've talked about those recently, but the clinical trials are coming and they seem to be moving forward. Fingers crossed, we'll see what happens there. In the meantime, everyone has to determine their risk and the risk for their community. Vaccines are still the best way to maintain your health, even though they do not completely keep you from getting COVID. They can keep you out of the hospital, which is great. And masks. Also, masks, they're great. N95s, they're really good. Good news about the lockdowns, though. We do have some good news from the lockdowns. Guess what happens when you send people home they don't have to work and they don't have to commute, and they have a bunch of free time.
They make sourdough.
They do. They get creative. So, a study out of the Paris Brain Institute and the CNRS Sorbonne University, a bunch of people worked together to create a couple of surveys of people to assess the impact of lockdown on creativity. And what they determined is that the lockdown stressed people out. People were stressed psychologically because people didn't know what was going on. It was a new situation. They're stuck in their houses. They don't have the normal social input. And it was like, ah. But the author of the study says, on average, they felt more creative. And by correlating the two pieces of information, we showed that the better people felt, the more creative they thought they were. They also found that more creative activities related to the issues of the situation. So, like you mentioned, sourdough. A lot of the activities that increased during the lockdown period were cooking, sports, watching sports and dance programs, or doing them in your house, self-help initiatives and gardening. 28 activities investigated. They also looked at interior design, sewing, creating diverting objects. Diverting objects, I love that. What's this object? I will divert it to something else. About 40% of those were already practiced in the 5 years prior to confinement. They increased their practice. So people took their hobbies and did them more. And there was definitely a correlation between positive mood and creativity, but also negative and creativity. The researchers go on to say, here one of our analyses suggests that creative expression enabled individuals to better manage their negative emotions linked to confinement and therefore to feel better during this difficult period.
I think this has also proved that the 4-day work week needs to happen.
Yes. I mean, I'm just imagining. So hear me out on the artificial intelligence stuff. And Blair, we talk a lot about like how much advancements in technology lead to people working more hours. It makes you more efficient and then you can work more. No, give people the time off to do the more human creative things. When you give people time,
Yeah. In the
creativity
future,
can ensue.
automation will make mom's job easier at the house.
I'm just gonna sit on the couch. No, I might
there was
actually write a
always-
book. Come on.
There's always been a lie
Yeah.
that automation, for instance, was going to somehow alleviate the length of the workday, when in fact what they used it for was to just eliminate
Cram
jobs
more
from some
in.
sectors.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and cram more in for sure.
And
Increase
so- and then-
productivity.
Yeah.
So you need a big shift change, and like the 4-day work week is like a real thing that should happen. Like
Yes.
that's a thing.
Agreed.
And you know,
it would be
and
good for the economy too. All the
would
people
be good
griping
for
about the
the
economy all the time.
and I could go on a short rant about the economy maybe in the after show. But
After show's a good place for
the
that.
two sides of that, which I will talk about in the after show then, is housing costs versus small businesses affording wages. And that's the actual competition in every economy that nobody seems to address directly. And automation plays a big part in that. And I'm going to do
Can make
a
it
Bernie
play a huge part in
finger
that.
wave thing.
Absolutely.
And to talk about that later.
Let's all
But
do
I will,
our art.
you know,
Is my point.
So far, I mean, AI is heading down the route of trying to also replicate human creativity, but still the thing that the human mind has is the ability to adapt quickly and creatively to situations. And the human mind is a creative, wonderful place to spend time. COVID, thank you for reminding us of that. And hopefully we can take some of these lessons from the last couple of years and apply them to our future moving forward, right? Better future for everyone. I hope you're all enjoying the show. If you really enjoy This Week in Science, please head over to our website, TWIS.org. You can find show notes and all sorts of fantastic things about the show there. You can also find a link to our Patreon community. Patreon is where our listeners support the show. You can join other listeners in supporting the ongoing efforts of TWIS to bring science to people all around the world. Science, curiosity, creativity, we're here for you every week. We thank you for your support. We really can't do this without you. It's time for Blair's Animal Corner, isn't it?
With Blair?
She loves our creatures, great and small. Biped, millipede, no pet at all. If you want to hear about animals, she's your girl. Except for giant pandas and squirrels. There's Animal Corner.
What you got, Blair?
Well, before I get real weird with you, I'm going to give you a little bit of nice, heartwarming news. California
that.
condors have returned to a slice of Northern California habitat for the first time in 130 years. Early last week, 4 condors were released into the wild. In the 1840s, the birds were shot for sport, collected for museums. They were also impacted by DDT in the 1950s. In the 1980s, there were only 22 birds left in the world. And in 1983, they were launched in a captive breeding program. Not physically launched. The captive breeding program was launched. They weren't like catapulted. But anyway, they were one of the very first endangered species to be named. And today, there are now approximately 300 condors flying in the wild in California. Last week marked the first time that they were released into redwood habitat, which is one of their native areas that now they are expanded into. So, yeah, not weird, not strange, not too much to talk about. I just wanted to let everyone know that there is good news in animal conservation. It does happen. There are breakthroughs, and communities work together to make pretty large strides. 22 to 300 is a pretty big jump for any population. And so if we can do it for them, we can definitely do it for other species. So I just wanted to throw that out there. California condors making a comeback.
I'm glad you did.
I'm actually still
Yay!
terrified of running into one. It's a
You're
big
afraid
bird.
of all animals. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it.
It's a big bird, but it doesn't want to eat you.
No, unless you're
No,
dead.
I know.
Are you dead things?
Speaking of dead things,
Oh,
Sometimes.
great.
I want to talk about something that has been all over the internet, which is the
Okay.
Bolivian river dolphins playing with an anaconda.
Oh, I'm so glad you want to talk about this. All right, let's go into it.
Not heard about this.
So this is a trio of scientists who were trying to report on Bolivian river dolphins. They're really hard to study. They're in the upper Madeira basin of the Bolivian part of the Amazon. Very little is known about them. They're endangered, but they barely ever breach the surface of the water. And the water is so murky that researchers have a really, really, really hard time studying them or knowing anything about them. How many of them are there? What do they eat? How do they communicate with each other? If you talk to people who actually live there, maybe they'd have a good idea. But at least for, the researchers that are traveling to Bolivia and trying to study them in very specific situations, they have a very hard time. Snark aside, these researchers saw some of these Bolivia river dolphins popping up above the surface of the river, and they took a bunch of pictures. When they got back, they noticed in the pictures, oh, what's this? A Beni anaconda. It's a boa species known to live only in parts of Bolivia. It overlaps in its habitat with a lot of the Bolivian river dolphin habitat. Adults can grow to be about 2 meters in length. That is about 6 feet. And so what they noticed was there is this Beni anaconda with the dolphins in the water. The more they looked at these pictures, the dolphins weren't eating the anaconda. They were passing it back and forth. As they continued to look at the photos, it looks like they were playing with it. Sometimes in a synchronized way, carrying downstream together. Other times, taking turns, individualizing play. The other strange thing is that they noticed that these adult males in the group were sexually aroused as they played with the snake. Which doesn't
Oh
really
my.
mean anything. It happens with dolphins. Dolphins get sexually aroused all the time. But really, what
Male
it means
dogs,
is,
dolphins. It just
yeah,
happens.
what
Yeah.
it means is they were excited. So
Mhm.
this indicates it's play. It wasn't for food. They weren't, fighting over it. They were tossing it back and forth. So this really looks like play. The adults also could have been using it to teach each other about the snake. I don't know. It sounds like they were just playing with it. They also noted that the snake was held underwater for long periods of time, didn't appear to be moving, most likely dead. Yeah, I'd say so.
Oh,
So
no. So they're playing with a dead anaconda, maybe.
definitely. I would say definitely. From my perspective, seems like it.
How long could anacondas can swim, can't they?
Yes, and they can
They
hold their breath for a
and
pretty long time.
yeah.
Yeah, so I would
Oh,
guess that this one was dead from blunt trauma. Dolphins
Hmm.
can do that, so
right.
they are dangerous beasts. Yeah, so this is just a reminder that dolphins are terrifying. No, this is a reminder that
Yeah.
dolphins are smart. They like to play, and
There's no reason to be afraid of anacondas.
this is a reminder that dolphins will play with what they will.
This is a reminder that when two horny dolphins are throwing you around in the water, it's just best to play dead. Just write it out.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
this-
so this is what we've learned
Poor
about this
snake.
little known dolphin, is that at least this one time they played with a snake. That's what we know.
At least this one time when we
So,
were watching.
yes,
Okay.
I don't have any enlightening take. I just kind of wanted to bring up the situation. I wanted to make sure, I've seen a lot of the sensationalized headlines that made it sound like the snake was involved in things in a way that didn't make sense. They just got excited. That's all that happened.
And I think
Hey,
that's the
yeah,
I
no
think that is
kink
the big
shaming
take.
of river
Yeah.
dolphins
Oh,
here on
yeah.
this show.
Yeah.
I tell you.
No
But I think
kink
that's
shaming.
I think that's the big take, is not to put our human values
Yeah.
onto dolphins. And we know that male dolphins, they get aroused when they get excited. And it doesn't necessarily mean anything other than
Mhm.
excitement.
Mhm.
So they
Mhm.
were playing.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I got a big snake. Look what I found.
Yeah. Yes.
It's no answers, but it's fascinating.
No.
Fascinating
Now I'm
behavior.
not sure. We had a photo up earlier, and
Yes.
now I'm not sure if whether or not that was the anaconda.
It
The
is.
anaconda is
in the-
towards the top
in the-
by the that's the anaconda right there.
Yeah, no, I think the other thing is not.
Correct.
Okay.
That is a phallus.
Okay, that's okay. Because
Yeah.
at first I thought that. Never mind. What
No,
else you
no.
got, Blair?
If you were curious, that's what it looks like. So next in the weird world of Blair's Animal Corner, I wanted to talk about bats that buzz like bees.
Great.
Oh,
Okay, that's
yeah,
normal.
This is a great. I saw this. I was gonna send this to you, and then I saw you already had it. Of
Oh,
course.
I had it. Those listeners of the show that are constantly telling me to bring bat studies. This is 2 weeks in a row. You're welcome. In Batesian mimicry, a harmless species imitates more dangerous ones in order to scare away predators. This is what researchers believe is the first case of acoustic Batesian mimicry and one of the very first in mammals. And that is greater mouse-eared bats imitating the buzzing sound of stinging insects to discourage, you guessed it, owls from eating them. So let's back up.
I
Okay.
wasn't going to guess that,
Whoa.
but okay, thanks.
Yeah, this is why this story is amazing. So if I told you I had a story about a bat, an owl, and a hornet, I don't believe you would come up with this story.
No.
So a bat is imitating a hornet to scare away an owl so that the owl won't eat the bat.
That's so awesome.
Yes. So how did researchers figure this out? They made this discovery while conducting field research in which bats were caught in mist netting a lot, which is usually used to catch birds. When they handled the bats to take them out of the net, they started buzzing like bees. Like, what? So they started to wonder what this was about. Is this a warning? Is this something to deter predators? So then they looked at the acoustic similarity between buzzing sounds of bats and some stinging insects. Next, they placed those sounds back to captive owls, the natural predator of these bats, to see how they would react. They consistently reacted to insects and bat buzzes by moving away from the speaker. But sounds of potential prey, like normal bat sounds, they moved closer to the speaker. Okay, sounds good. This is the first example, as I said, of interspecific mimicry between mammals and insects. And it's one of very few, if not the only example of acoustic mimicry. So very cool. The similarities between the buzzes of the hornets and the bats were actually harder to hear if you just played them completely as they were. But if they altered those sounds, they narrowed the acoustic parameters to what owls can hear. Yeah, then it sounded almost indistinguishable. So buzzing sounds are even more similar when it's heard the way that owls hear them. So then the question becomes, why are owls afraid of hornets? Did they get stung by hornets? Likely, yes.
Everybody
but they don't
gets
have
stung
data
by
to prove it.
hornets.
Yeah,
Nobody
yeah.
likes hornets. They're mean.
Right. And hornets do nest in tree cavities where birds can sometimes go, and birds anecdotally will avoid cavities that have hornets in them, have a hornet's nest. So it's very likely that these owls are often stung by hornets. They hear the stinging sound, they go, I'm gonna scoot. I don't know if they think that the bat is gonna like open its mouth and hornets are gonna come out or what, but it's enough to scare them away. So this could open up a whole field of research into auditory mimicry. The first thing that I thought of that actually, for them to say it's one of the only encounters that they have found, I think about the gopher snake, which shakes its tail against dried grass to sound like a rattlesnake. They also kind of look like a rattlesnake. So sure, they look like a rattlesnake. That's visual mimicry, but they also make the sound. So it's not unheard of, but it is pretty wild for a mammal to mimic the sound of an insect.
And we know bats echolocate, but the idea that bats would mimic, I haven't ever heard of that before. That's fascinating.
Well, it's a mammal mimicking an insect
also
to fool an avian. Like it's very
and the whole
also
ecosystem.
That's really a cool story.
Yeah. So there you go. Bats.
When did the bats learn that the owls don't like the hornets?
Yeah.
Did the bats was it transitive property? Was it like, I don't like the hornets, so the owls won't like the hornets? Let's see if it works. Did they try?
Was one bat like super hoarse, like he had a cold, and instead of screeching, he buzzed and he survived?
Or maybe they were just sitting around doing impressions.
Yeah.
And then they noticed that the owls really didn't like one of their impressions.
I think that's really the interesting question, is the origin of this mimicry.
How did these things start?
Fascinating.
That is so cool.
Go science, figure it out.
Gosh, bats are smart.
Discover the things. Hey, Justin.
Yeah.
You want to tell us some stories now?
Okay, let's talk about Uruguay.
Okay, Uruguay.
The first whole genome sequences of ancient people of Uruguay has been collected and analyzed. This is a PNAS Nexus published research led by anthropologists at Emory University and the University of the Republic of Montevideo, Uruguay. According to the paper, we find a surprising connection to the ancient individuals from Panama and eastern Brazil, but not to modern Amazonians in their study. This result may be indicative of a migrative route into South America that may have occurred along the Atlantic coast. And we also find a distinct ancestry previously undetected in South America. So they had DNA samples some that dated back 800 years, another from a woman that went back 1500 years. So both well before the arrival of Columbus. It says, our work here shows that indigenous people of ancient Uruguay exhibit an ancestry that has not been previously detected in South America, according to John Lindo, co-corresponding author and Emory assistant professor in anthropology. This contributes to the idea that South America being a place where multi-regional diversity existed instead of a monolithic idea of a single Native American group across North and South America. Archaeological evidence for human settlement in the area that we now know of as Uruguay, which is, they say along the south coast of Brazil. It's really close to Buenos Aires, Argentina. It's between Brazil and Argentina on the coast. They have evidence of settlements there that go back more than 10,000 years. European colonizers made contact in the early 1500s, and by the 1800s, colonizers had been launching massacre after massacre on various hunter-gatherer groups in that territory, basically pretty much wiping them out. And then this is quotey voice of Lindo again. Through the first whole genome sequences of the indigenous people of the region before the arrival of Europeans, we were able to reconstruct at least a small part of their genetic prehistory. This work then is going to open the door for modern day Uruguayans to potentially link themselves to the genetic populations that existed before colonization. And he says, we would like to gather more DNA samples from ancient archaeological sites from all over Uruguay, which would allow people living in the country today to explore the possible genetic connection. If you're of European descent, you can have your DNA sequenced and use that information to pinpoint where your ancestors are, down to specific villages even. If you are descended from people indigenous to the Americas, you may be able to learn that some chunk of your genome is Native American, but it's unlikely you can trace a direct lineage because there are not enough ancient DNA references available, which is something I've absolutely seen. I've got 6% Native American. I've equal percentages of other things like Portuguese, a little bit of Greek, and it gets pinpoints of, it's probably Northern Greek from this small 3% Greek thing. And then Native American, it shows 2 continents.
Right. It could be any of
6% from somewhere on that side of the planet. All the rest of it, it's got little, maybe from this village was it? Yeah, exactly. And this is only great-grandparent I would have had. That would have been a full Native American. So I can see how this is going to be a pretty cool tool going forward. Collaborating closely with indigenous communities, locally archaeologists, Lindo hopes to advance DNA sequencing techniques to build a free online portal with increasing numbers of ancient DNA references from the Americas to help people better understand their ancestors, which I absolutely would. If I found out, I don't know if I've got ancient Uruguayan, some sort of Peruvian thing. I don't know if it's a North American, if it's a Blackfoot. So I have no idea. Native Californian. But I would absolutely soak up whatever remnants or post-colonization are left of those cultures immediately and want to learn all about them, as people do with ancestry and other scenarios too. And it is unfortunate that we don't have that record currently.
And I think it really goes to show the biased nature of a lot of the research that's been done that is focused so much on European ancestry as opposed to what is actually going on here in the Americas.
Yeah, there is bias. There's also number of the population that they are serving, but then there's also issues with North American Native American remains and the just absolute travesty of how they've been handled over the years, that prevents a lot of that sort of research from being done. So we'll see what happens going forward. But I do like this story. Anyway, the last story I've got today is about tattoos.
Tattoos. So tell me, are you going to
So
break my heart? I don't get to have a fancy health tattoo that I can touch and that's going to tell me what's in my blood
I'm not going to
yet.
break anybody's heart unless, not intentionally anyway. It's really it's you, not me. It's just written. Tattoos. I've got a few. You might too. Celebrities, professional athletes, musicians have them. The guy your mother dated before she met your father was covered in tattoos. In fact, your mother has a tattoo you have never seen. Ask her. I'm not saying you're going to want to know the answer, what it is, or where it's located, but it's a conversation you should probably have at some point. Aesthetic
Don't ask.
skin inking has been around for a long time. We have seen them on 1,000-year-old pre-Incan Peruvian mummies, 1,500-year-old Siberian princess of Ukak, 3,000-year-old Egyptian ladies, 4,000-year-old Tarim Basin mummies, 5,000-year-old Utsi the Iceman had tattoos, 43-year-old Adam Levine has some tattoos. The list goes on. There's a lot of people who've got tattoos. But imagine a tattoo that could be functional as a health sensor, telling you how much oxygen you are using when exercising, measuring your blood glucose levels at any time of day, monitoring exposure to environmental toxins. Then everybody would want to get tattoos, even the people who don't have one for whatever reason. Engineers at Tufts University have worked out a way to make a tattoo of sorts with a silk-based material that glows brighter or dimmer under a lamp. And the one that they've created changes depending on exposure to different levels of oxygen in the blood. They report their findings in Advanced Functional Materials Journal. So the novel sensor, which is currently limited to oxygen reading levels, is made up of a gel formed from a protein components of silk, fibroin. The silk proteins have unique properties that make them especially compatible as an implantable material. And currently, these only are lasting in the skin somewhere between a few weeks and a little over a year. So these aren't permanent as of yet, because the body's going to break it down over time. Substances, though, in the blood, they say glucose, lactate, electrolytes. That's a really interesting one. That's a really fascinating one. Dissolved oxygen, all these things that can offer windows into the health and performance of your body can be theoretically detected and absorbed by this silk material. And even, diabetics could get monitoring just by shining a light over a patch of skin. In experiments, the implanted sensors detect the oxygen levels in animal models in real time, accurately tracked high, low, normal levels of oxygen. And this is apparently just the latest. This medical group in Kaplan's lab, they're working a lot with these silk proteins. So they've got the sensors that they're working on. They're also doing orthopedic implants. They're doing scaffolding for creating new tissues for heart and bones, where you sort of build up the tissues over a scaffolding that's made. It sounds like they're finding a lot of really interesting uses for this. But yeah, I think I would definitely be on board for having sensor tattoos. I think that would be fun. I think that would be.
I like the idea of this one also. It's not. It could be it's not like a tattoo. It's it's like a little sensor light. It's subcutaneous, and you just slip it under your skin, and when your oxygen levels in this case, but you could be looking at insulin, you could be looking at glucose, you could be looking at pH. Like there's all sorts of things it could sense, and it suddenly changes colors or lights up at you. Like, oh, time to change that filter.
I love the idea of this for certain things, but it scares me for other things, right? Like for medical privacy, you wouldn't want certain items about yourself to be displayed for anyone to see on your skin.
Oh, but what if we had a subcutaneous sensor that indicated whether or not women were pregnant?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's on the mind for me because of all the,
Right. I know.
the
I mean, but it could go even
app
broader. Yeah. What?
situation happening right now. It would just be, like, oh, it's your time of the month. I can tell it's blinking. Like, oh my, what?
Right. Well, these all require a light to be
Yeah.
shown on them
There's
to
no
be
light.
active. But I can imagine, yeah, you're in the club and you're like dancing and all this, and then somebody's like, "Oh, look, somebody's got pretty low oxygen levels for being out here on the dance floor. It might not be a healthy
Maybe you
mix."
should get tested for
might be
COVID.
might be telling a little bit more about yourself than you want, I suppose. But
Yikers.
but yeah, like I like the idea of the electrolytes because that's the one like knowing when you've overdone it and are getting dehydrated would
Yeah.
be fantastic knowledge. That's the one thing I can think of. The diabetic thing, of course, there's all forms of monitoring that are out there that all seem a bit intrusive and annoying. Like if I got diabetes, I'd just be in so much trouble. Like I don't think I could even
You'd
prick
never
a
be
finger.
checking.
I just never. I'll just keep eating candy if I'm feeling like. I'd just be bad at it, I think. But if there was
think you
just
would
a
take
little
care
a little sensor, I could just put the flashlight on and it said, "Yeah, you're fine," or maybe do something.
You know what I think that the actual application of this would be super helpful is something you put subcutaneous under your smartwatch or your fitness tracker that then
Mhm.
it sends light signals to your tracker that then sends that information to your phone, because then it's like it's more confidential, it's sent to you personally, you can turn it on, you can say I know it's
Yeah.
not
Well,
ideal, but it's at
because
least
then
it's
you've
done
got then you've got the
confidential. This
broadcasting out
the
seems
to the
like many
battery.
world.
layers of
I don't know.
transmission.
But it does seem like
Better-
it's something that you
Yeah.
already have your fitness tracker
Yeah.
there. It could track multiple things in a way that your tracker could not, and it could communicate with. I don't know. It's just because it's light, that's also how that works.
Yeah, because you're right.
I'm
Because the Bluetooth
communicating.
connection is so secure. No one.
Yeah. Well, yes, we have our secure podcast, our secure stream. I hope you're secure that this is This Week in Science. I have a few more stories to bring to you now. Hey, we've been talking a lot recently about how we can keep from getting old. We can What was your story last week, Justin? We can do fecal transplants, microbiome transplants. There have been studies. Oh, we can inject
Yeah.
young blood. We can be like old vampires trying to be young. We're talking about last week about metabolites and various things. Well, brand new study published in Nature this week, cerebrospinal fluid. If we were to inject cerebrospinal fluid, perhaps it would make our brains younger. Researchers just published in Nature about their study in which they took cerebrospinal fluid from young mice and injected it into old mice, and then tested them on a fear conditioning memory test and discovered that, hey, the old mice that got the CSF, they had better oligodendrocytes, which are kind of like the supportive cells in the brain, not necessarily the neurons themselves, but the ones that are packed all around it. The oligodendrocytes support brain cells by producing myelin, shields the axons, makes the transmission of neural signals a little stronger. So, yeah, cerebrospinal fluid contains something that stimulates oligodendrocytes to boost up their activity, to act younger, and to make old brains younger. They found that this something is called a serum response factor. And if they used another compound called fibroblast growth factor 17, that FGF 17, there's a lot of it in young mouse cerebrospinal fluid. It boosts SRF levels, which stimulates the oligodendrocytes. And so maybe we won't actually have to use the cerebrospinal fluid after all, but it's these growth factors
Yeah.
that potentially make it all work a little bit better.
Yeah, because
Here I
I'm on
am
the go.
already
Yeah.
extracting spinal fluid from mice, and you're now
From
telling
your
me I don't even need to be
children.
doing.
That's what
No,
I'm saying.
oh, I was gonna
Today's
use
on the
mouse.
go immortal doesn't want to
Wow.
stop for a child. They want their stuff to go, you know.
But I think the key to all of this is that we're seeing with all these mouse studies, this is all mouse studies so far, like really, we're not, it, there's a ways to go with understanding how it will work in people. But the idea is that there are metabolites, that there are things that are changing the way that the cells work, the way that they signal with each other, the way that they determine whether they're old or whether they're young. And one of the things that affects all of this is our diet. And apparently, there is a type of a type of, I guess you could call it a supplement, but a fatty acid. It's a very particular kind of fatty acid called a plasmalogen. And plasmalogens have been shown to potentially help to beat off mild Alzheimer's deficits. Researchers just publishing this week, researchers from Jiaotong Liverpool University, Stanford University, Shanghai Jiaotong University, and the University of Chinese Academy of Sciences, they just published their work reporting that if you want to eat a diet containing organisms from the sea of the group Acidiaceae, that you too might be able to reverse some of the main signs of aging in your brain. Blair, do you remember what Acidiaceae are?
What the heck is that? Jellyfish or something? What is that?
I read this story for this week, so I know the answer, but I wouldn't have known. It's sea squirts.
Sea squirts. If you want to eat sea squirts, you too can,
Do I
can
dare
help
ask
boost your
what is
brain.
a sea squirt?
It's a tunicate.
A
Does that
tunicate.
answer your question?
It's a kind of tuna. It's a tuna fish.
No,
Oh, perfect. That's that's
no.
not
They
tuna.
look like those
They're little
those
undersea.
toys that you would squish through your hands. That's like a gel filled tube with a hole down the middle. That's basically what they
Yes.
look like.
Oh.
You know what I'm talking
Oh.
They're not the kinds of organisms that you normally think of as appetizing or what could be delicious. Yet they are found in Japanese cuisine, in Italian cuisine, various cuisines that are focused on sea life, on sea organisms, use them to and enjoy them. And
Mhm.
apparently, they are full of plasmalogens. These plasmalogens are really, really important for cell membranes, specifically within our nervous system. And so the proportion of plasmalogens decreases in our brains, in our cell membranes, in our nerves, in our in all over our bodies as we age. And so you would think if you can supplement your diet with either the precursors of or just plasmalogens, you might be able to improve memory deficits and aging effects that result from the loss of plasmalogens throughout your
I
body
gotta
as
start
you
taking my
age.
plasmalogen supplements.
Yeah, and so I went
then.
looking, and there are plasmalogen supplements on the internet, but you don't know. I mean,
No.
really, you can eat scallops, you can eat sea squirts. There's a lot of sea life that contain these plasmalogens. Um, I'm not quite sure. I haven't figured out the exact dosage, how many milligrams per kilograms of sea squirts you're going to have to eat to have a benefit in your brain yet. So stay tuned on that. until I can figure out exactly how big a serving size of sea squirt you need to see benefits.
Going back to draining the spinal fluid from mice.
But
An unvetted source, just a quick Google, tells me that there are also foods that have plasmalogens in them, like pork and beef. I don't know if
pork and beef
they're
too,
not
yeah.
they're not at as high levels as sea squirts, mussels,
Yep.
and scallops, but they are.
Oh, so I can
there.
just eat bacon?
You can eat
okay, I'll
mussels,
live forever.
scallops, sea
I
squirts.
do eat a lot of mussels, so I feel like I'm
Uh,
pretty well off.
but anyway, this is the first study to show in detail how these plasmalogens influence the aging brain and remove some of the deficits that occur as a result of aging. You know what is also great that a lot of people do eat, and living in the Pacific Northwest, it's one of my favorite foods, blueberries. And I want you to know, I have determined from a study published this week, a half a cup of blueberries a day is enough to supplement and to reduce your risk for dementia. You start in your midlife
Oh,
eating a half a cup
something
of
you can do
blueberries a
later in life.
day. Late midlife, not late life. I mean,
Well,
late life you can start whenever, really.
How do I know when it's midlife? This thing doesn't have
here.
I don't have a skin monitor that tells me how close to the end. I'm
It's time for
tracking here.
carousel.
What is it? 89 years old is life expectancy. So what? 50s?
Is that what they call
40s, 50s?
midlife?
We're
Oh.
just blueberries. Blueberries
But Kiki, are
Wow,
you really
wherever
going to
you're
eat
at.
blueberries every day? Or did they find what's in the blueberries and you can eat other things too?
Well, in this particular study, they did give individuals powdered blueberry extract.
Hmm.
So it contained all sorts of blueberry stuff without the fiber and appears to have benefited the individuals. So in this particular study, they enrolled overweight women and men 50 to 65 years old with subjective cognitive decline, and then had assessments to determine a bunch of things. And they checked mitochondrial function as well. They found that there was a small benefit to the blueberry group as compared to the non-blueberry group. And they also had a correction of their hyperinsulinemia. So it was good. And their mitochondrial function improved as well. So the cognitive findings improved executive ability in this middle-aged sample. So 50 to 65, they're calling middle-aged at this point. And it suggests that the potential mechanistic factors associated with anthocyanin and proanthocyanin are what we're looking at. Anthocyanin and proanthocyanin. These are antioxidant compounds within the blueberries.
My
But still-
money's on eat varied and colorful fruits and vegetables, and you'll be good.
Don't just eat the blueberries, everybody.
Well,
Blueberries and
advice-
sea squirts so that you can avoid eating the children. This is the diet, the TWIS diet. I am going to write a nutritional manual.
My advice is start collecting mouse spinal fluid now before you get to midlife, so that you can have enough of, because it's you only get very little per mouse. You're gonna need a lot of it.
Man, I'd rather drink mouse spinal fluid than eat blueberries.
What is wrong with you?
No, I'm kind of with you, Blair. Thank God my kids love them.
Blueberries.
My kids have devoured mountains
simple.
of blueberries.
man.
I can't stand them. I just
Berry
can't
fruit.
stand them.
I don't like fruit.
Bitter little awful things.
All right,
Terrible.
Go have
tasting.
your beef and your pork. How can
I'll
you
just
not
eat-
like
Scallops
I'll
and
just eat
mussels.
Bacon,
How-
bacon
how
and
can
shots
you
of
not like fruit
mouse
and
spinal
be
fluid.
mostly vegetarian?
I eat vegetables.
She's not a fruitarian. What are you talking about? Nobody does that.
Oh, it's rare when we learn something new about each other on this show.
Uh,
What a day. It's quite a day. Well, I hope that we have benefited everyone's brain fluid, that whether or not we're your sea squirt or your blueberry for the day, that we are benefiting your brain. We hope that you have enjoyed the show. We've made it to the end, yeah?
yes.
Yeah, I think we're there. A tight almost 90. Oh, well done.
Almost so close. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us and shout out to people who helped the show. Fada, thank you so much for all of your help on show notes and social media. Couldn't do it without you. Gord, Arnlor, others who help keep the chat rooms clean and happy. Thank you for maintaining that. Identity 4, thank you for recording the show. And Rachel, thank you for your editing and other assistance. So great. And I would really like to thank our TWIS sponsors. Thank you to Teresa Smith, James Schofer, Richard Badge, Kent Northcote, Rich Loveman, Pierre Vera, Velazar, Ralph E. Figueroa, John Ratnaswamy, Carl Kornfeld, Karen Tozzi, Woody MS, Chris Wozniak, Dave Bunn, Vegard Shefstad, Hal Snyder, Jonathan Stiles, a.k.a. Don Stylo, John Lee, Ali Coffin, Maddie Perrin, Gaurav Sharma, Ragan, Don Mundus, Stephen Albaran, Daryl Myshak, Stu Pollack, Andrew Swanson, Fredis 104, Sky Luke, Paul Ronovich, Kevin Reardon, Noodles, Jack, Brian Carrington, Matt Bass, Shauna Nina Lamb, John McKee, Greg Riley, Mark Hessenflow, Gene Tellier, Steve Leisman, a.k.a. Zima, Ken Hayes, Howard Tan, Rich Christopher Rappin, Dana Pearson, Richard, Brendan Minish, Johnny Gridley, Remy Day, Flying Out, Christopher Dreyer, Artyom, Greg Briggs, John Atwood, Rudy Garcia, Dave Wilkinson, Rodney Lewis, Paul Phillips, Shane, Kurt Larson, Craig Landon, Sue Doster, Jason Olds, Dave Neighbor, Eric Nappy, O. Kevin Parachan, Aaron Luthen, Steve DeBell, Bob Calder, Marjorie, Paul Disney, David Simmerly, Patrick Pecoraro, Tony Steele, and Jason Roberts. Thank you for all of your support on Patreon. And if you would like to support us on Patreon, head over to twist.org and click on that Patreon link on next week's show.
We will be back Wednesday, 8 p.m. Pacific time, or Thursday, 5 a.m. Central European time, broadcasting live from our YouTube and Facebook channels and from twist.org/live.
Hey, do you want to listen to us as a podcast? Maybe while you powder your blueberries so you don't have to taste them? Just search for This Week in Science where podcasts are found. If you enjoyed the show, get your friends to subscribe as well.
For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes and links to stories will be available on our website, www.twist.org.
You can also contact us directly. Email Kirsten at kirsten@thisweekinscience.com, Justin at twistminion@gmail.com, or me, Blair, at blairbaz@twist.org. Just be sure to put TWIS, TWIS, in the subject line, or your email will be spam filtered into a bat that sounds like a bee that's being chased by an owl.
You can also then hit us up on the Twitter where we are at Twist Science, at Dr. Kiki, at Jacksonfly, and at Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover or address, a suggestion for an interview, a haiku that comes due in the night, please let us know.
We'll be back here next week, and we hope you'll join us again for more great science news.
And if you've learned anything from the show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth. And I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in 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 Science.